Ah, there we are. Alright, I'll tell the world. Oh, gotta itch my nose. Streaming game dev, doing basic stuff. Based. Alright. So, last time I was just starting to do some basic work in Unreal. I mocked together a car for scale, and then I started to create some broken roads. Couldn't get the broken roads to work right, so I actually did a Google search about broken roads so that I would know what they were supposed to friggin' look like, because apparently I'm not very smart like that. Anyway, they are a little bit more simple than I was making them out to be. So, I still can't figure out what I did that used to make them snap. I really want to know how I got it to snap on my old machine. So it might just be that this has to be set to... Well, I don't think that's it, though. I have a feeling that's something else. Yeah, that's not snapping. I think that's scaling, like if I were to scale things up and down. See, once I've actually put it in the scene, it snaps to a grid like this, but that's worthless because I've just dropped it somewhere arbitrary in the scene. So it's not on the grid. It's just somewhere completely random. And I know that there is a way to get these things to show up properly, but I don't happen to know it. So one of the dangers, I am working in Unreal now. It's a completely new environment for me. I mean, I putted around with it a little bit way back in ye day, but by and large, it's something I've never actually tried to develop a game in. So it's basically new. And here you can see what I've done is I've just created a simple road with a simple crack just to test and see whether or not this would work out. And the idea here is that I can create rotations and stuff pretty trivially if I allow the road to break, which is what I had before. But before I was like trying to create stretches of road that were broken, and really what I needed to do was just create breaks like that. And it's very forgiving, so there's not any particular need. Oh, turn off snapping. There's not any particular need to be really clever about it, but I do want another kind of break. So we're going to go ahead and do one more kind of break and see whether that feels right. Because this kind of break is good for small changes, like, 5 degrees and whatever. I want a kind of break that'll work for fairly large changes. And so to do that, I'm going to do this basically the same thing I was doing the other day, which was using cell fracture. But instead of breaking it apart like I did, I'm going to do a different technique. So we're going to go ahead and put the middle right here in the middle, and we're going to apply the location. And then we are going to use a cell fracture. We're going to turn off recursion, but we're going to need plenty of noise. And let's see. Oh, not quite. Let's try it again. I want to... See, the recursion, I think it only matters... I think this only matters if we turn on recursion. Yeah. So here you can see what I'm doing is I'm trying to fracture it. But what I really want to do is fracture it down the middle. It looks like it might not work out for us. I was trying to do it with the cell fracture, but it looks like the cell fracture isn't going to end up working out in our favor. So what we're going to do instead is just use simple cuts. And we'll just do it manually. Not that big a deal. Just hit K and start to do some arbitrary crack sort of things. No big deal. We want them to be relatively straight on the top and the bottom because those are the places where we're going to get the most flex up and down. So if we have a nice straight edge, then if the angle changes so that they're up or down, they won't really give it away. Because if you've got like a long slicey bit like this, that's kind of triangular, then this part will go way, way further than this part when you tilt them. And that means that you'll end up with a noticeable kind of outcropping, and that's not what we want. Anyway, in the middle, we're just going to break it up into some arbitrary chunky shapes. It doesn't have to be anything significant or clever, just needs to be chunky. We don't want any of our shapes to be too long, which is why I'm kind of breaking them up if they get to be too significant. It's not that big a deal. Just fracture. Cut this one in half. It's a little too big. And then we'll just finish it off with this. Hooray! So what we're going to do here is we're going to break all of these parts out into their own contiguous sections, but you can see that the cut didn't actually separate them. So when I hit Control L, they're all going to continue to be connected. We created the cuts, but then we forgot to actually punch them apart. So if we were to do this, you can press V, and you can just keep pressing V, and now they should be separate. Yeah. So now we can punch it out. Oh, we don't have to punch it out. What we have to do is select all of the pieces in the middle. Oh, that's not it. Like that. Select those. And that one too, down here. There we are. We come up here, turn that off, and then go to individual origins here. And now when we scale everything down, you see how they scale apart from each other? And that's the secret of making this particular approach work. Now the only issue we've got here is that these are hollow. There's no bottom because I deleted the bottom before I went any further with this. So what we're going to need to do is create a skin for this that is going to fill it in. Got a couple of options there. I guess the easiest option is just use the solidify modifier and make it nice and fat, something like that. And that should just be enough. We shouldn't have to worry about it. But we will have to do just a touch of editing on the end pieces, just due to the way they work. Just make sure that that's deep enough for us. Yeah, that looks fine. So now when we go back in here, you can see that we've got a kind of a fold over down here, where this part is kind of folded up. That's just due to the way that it wraps, and it's not really sensible. So we're just going to drag it down. It doesn't have to be any more serious than this. This is fine. But the problem is that if we put this in the game engine, it's not going to be separate. It's going to be one object. And obviously that means that it can't fulfill its purpose of being the part of the road where we turn. So what we're going to have to do is break this into 3 pieces. We got this piece. We got this piece. Oh. And then we got the rest of the pieces. So let's go ahead and set it up. So this is going to be road S1 rubble A. This is going to be road S1 rubble C, and this is going to be road S1 rubble B. Easy enough, right? And then we just need to export them. So just make sure that they're set up properly and hit that export button. Pop over into Unreal, move Unreal in the taskbar so I can find it. Not sure why you needed to give me an empty message log. I'll presume you tried to say something and I didn't read it. So we got the rubble here, rubble A, rubble B. We got a couple different rubbles. We got rubble underscore B and rubble B. These are the old ones. They don't exist anymore. We'll just delete them. There are references in the undo history. Get rid of them. And then we'll use the new rubbles, these 3 rubbles. Just drop that into the scene somewhere. Now the only issue is that those 3 rubbles don't have a position. So we're going to have to copy a position and paste it. I know there is a way around this. I just don't happen to know what it is. Boom. And then drag that out. Oh, turn the grid back on. And there we go. Oh, they're not actually on the same plane as this element. Yeah, that's fine. Well, we'll just go ahead and copy the plane too. Is this local or global? That's global. How do I change this to be a local offset? There's got to be a way, right? Seriously? There's no way to do it on a local axis? That's... Nah, let me just look it up. There's got to be a way. No, that's not how you spell Unreal. Unreal, move on local axis. People are telling me how to do it with a blueprint. That's not what I want at the moment. Oh, you can actually just toggle between the transformation widgets with space, huh? That's interesting. World and local transformation modes. When you are using interactive transformation method, you can choose the reference coordinate system. How? Click on the globe icon in the toolbar in the upper right-hand section. Oh, okay. Easy enough. Hooray. All right, so that wasn't too bad at all. In Unity, they're handled a little bit differently, but it's not that big a deal. I'm having a hard time with that in Blender, actually. The newest version of Blender doesn't seem to do the proper local translations. Like, you normally hit like T, and then if you hit X, it'll go along the X-axis, or G rather, and then if you hit X, it'll go along the X-axis. Hit X again, it should go along the X local version, but it doesn't seem to be doing that anymore. And I don't really know if that's, you know, what's the deal with that. So, I hope that it's just me misunderstanding something, because it's kind of an important part of my Blender workflow, is to do that pretty commonly, you know? And then we'll just take this and bring him up, and then push him down. So the idea here is, obviously this is a very rough version, but the idea here is that when the road needs to be not straight, we can crack it. This isn't just that the road needs to be, we're not trying to make it so that all of the road's curves are going to be in this broken format, but I do know that we're going to need to have roads that aren't entirely intact. In theory, we could use like a road generator tool. I'm sure that there are plenty of those available for us, but I don't want to. I don't want to start by using a bunch of plugins. So we're going to build our roads using meshes. And why not, right? So if we're going to do that, we're going to need some way to be a little bit organic with how the meshes move, and this is my solution. We're going to use cracked roads. So other than the cracked roads, we're going to need a couple of different kinds of roads for our game. Let's see whether or not we can change this built-in dude to have a different speed. Clothing. Pretty sure this guy does not have any clothing. Mesh, capsule component, mesh. I bet I have to open this up as a blueprint. More clothing simulation. Interesting. Navigation. Activation. Cooking. Character movement. Alright. So here we've got max acceleration, braking, friction, mass. Max step height, walkable floor angle, max walk speed. Here we are. We're going to just go ahead and bring that up by a factor of 10, just for the sake of testing whether it works. That might be too much. I don't know whether we got a full 10 times the scale. Yeah, that's too much. Still. Wahaha! Superman! Oh, they do not, they're a little hardcore. They don't give you physics control while you're in midair. I'm a little surprised. I mean, normally games are pretty relaxed about that sort of thing. Boof. So we're going to go ahead and take that down a couple notches. Clearly that's just too many zeros. So let's bring that down to a third. And even that might be still a little bit high. That's not too bad if we're supposed to be a racing mech. I imagine this is about the fastest we'll go at a normal run. But one of the things about what I'm trying to accomplish with this little mech racing game is that there is technically no max speed. Or if there is, it's like very, very high. The problem is that your balance drops faster the more the changes in your velocity. And if your velocity is very high, then relatively small changes, like trying to make a corner, are going to result in very, very significant balance loss. So, in theory, a big part of the game will be about understanding when you don't want to go super, super fast. Anyway, let's build some more road types. And I'm looking at it, and this chunk of terrain is actually pretty small. That makes a lot of sense. The terrain chunks in Unity are huge, but the question here is whether or not there is an easy way to staple together a bunch of different terrain chunks. So if we look at the landscape mode here, we can change the landscape, but can we add, okay, add more components. Add new components where components can be added. Oh, that's interesting. So we're not even adding full chunks here. We're adding micro chunks. Oh, that's actually really interesting. I presume that's pretty much optimized under the hood. Move, huh? So they can be streamed in and out. Oh, this is definitely more full-featured than Unity's engine, at least when it comes to that. Control points. Spline mesh settings. I don't know what this means. Having a control point selected will connect the control point. Well, what does a control point do? Landscape splines tool is for creating linear features. Thank you. I knew you were going to do that, asshole. That need to conform to the landscape, such as paths or roads. The landscape splines can even push or pull the terrain. Let's try it. Okay, so that's not how you do it. Create a landscape spline to carve your landscape. So how do I create a spline element? Did I control click? Alright, so now we've got A landscape spline. I mean, if the roads can be created using literally just basic tools, maybe I'll do that instead of programming them some more. The only question I've got here is, what about the control points for these splines? These are pretty basic. Can I edit control points, or is it just going to... Oh yeah, there we are. Oh, I can't... Interesting. So they don't let you edit the control points on any axis. They just let you raise and lower them. That's not very useful. Let's go ahead and delete some of these segments that are clearly incorrect and see whether or not we can make it a little bit more. There we are. No longer have those upside down fractured pieces. Why is it now giving me control over nothing but the control points? How do I raise and lower the points like I did before? Ah, there we are. So I don't know how to turn this spline into anything. Deform landscape to splines. So I can tell the landscape to follow that spline, and it will create a landscape path along the spline, which is fine, but I don't believe I can paint the landscape to be a road. I don't think we've got directional painting. I mean, maybe we do, but I had always just assumed that I would have to make the roads a mesh. Spline mesh settings can be found in the detail settings. Mesh vertical offset. Landscape deformation. Do I have all of these points selected? I don't know. Select all connected segments. Select all connected control points. There we are. Mesh. So here we can specify a mesh. Is this mesh going to be extruded or duplicated? So if we were to choose a mesh, let's go ahead and choose a road. See what happens. Wall door, wall window, rock, pillar. There's a Toyota Corolla. What are they called? SM road? SM door, pillar, road. Okay, and we can see what's going on here. The meshes are being put at the control points, not scaled or stretched. That's interesting. That doesn't seem quite right. I mean, if they're just 90 degrees off, fine, whatever, I can fix that. But they're not being scaled or morphed in any way, so what use is this mesh? Let's take a look online. Unreal terrain spline road tutorial. Oh, I have a feeling that this is all going to be videos, and I can't really watch a video while I'm doing a video. But let's see here. Adding a static mesh actor to a spline in the content browser. Select a static mesh. Select all connected, click the segments button. It ensures that the static mesh is added to all the segments. Okay, so there's the segments button. but there's no longer a mesh option. So their tutorial is wrong. When I select the control points, I have the option to actually put the mesh in here. But it says specifically in the landscape spline section, next to select all connected, click the segments button. This ensures that the static mesh is added to all the spline's segments. I mean, I guess it doesn't show me that there is any sort of spline segment mesh going on here. I don't see any more meshes in any of these splines. Here is an array that's empty. Oh, okay, so they want me to add it here. Okay, so since I added it to the control points, these are considered like, these would be like, what do you want to call them? Like just signposts. They would be the thing that show where the turn is happening or whatever. But if we collect the segments and then we add in the spline meshes here, road. There we go. All right, that's much better. So now we can see what's going on here. The road is obviously on the wrong axis. It's strange. They're stretching it on the x-axis, which is a little bit unusual. Forward axis x. Let's switch that to y. That's more like it. All right. So now you can see that this has been stapled together in a fairly organic way. The road is a little bit rough, and that's because there's only like 8 verts. So let's go ahead and add a couple of verts to our road. Road S1, go on over there. Just go. There we are. And you can see how there's no verts in the middle, so there's no torsion. The road can't bend. So we'll just add some verts in the middle. There we go. And then we will export that. Go back out into Unreal. Let that be re-imported, just like that. Behold! No more low poly road. Oh my gosh! This was such a good find! I am becoming very, very happy. Yeah, Path Tracer stopped in. Sorry I wasn't reading your stuff. I was looking at landscape splines for Unreal Engine in the tab where I should have been looking at the chat. You are correct. The x-axis is the default, but you can switch it right here, so it's no biggie. This turned out to be super easy, super nice. I do not have to go and painfully weld together 1,000 different pieces of road. It just works. Now the only question is whether or not, and I'm sure the answer is yes. The question is really whether I can. I know the game can, the game engine can. I need to be able to tell whether we're stomping on a road. Presumably that's not going to be super hard. Can't edit landscape in Pi. Does Pi stand for play mode? Play in engine? Is that what it stands for? Probably. Well, that's quite a jump. I'm going to have to definitely take care of that. Okay, so we're obviously not going to stick with just one kind of road. We're going to need to do some actual breaking up of the road, and going to go with some different kinds of lanes and some turnoffs and stuff. I don't know whether all that stuff can be done in the spline engine. Probably not. So we'll probably have to do some kind of half and half setup, but it's not that big a deal. And it's far in the future. For now, assuming I can find a way to get the mech behavior to understand whether it's on a road or not, this is actually all I need. I don't need any more road stuff until it comes time for me to work on the actual systems of the game. Anyway, let's delete some of these road elements. We don't need them in the game, so we're going to... What happened? Oh, we're in the wrong... We don't need these in the game right now, so we'll just get rid of them. And then we might as well have it rebuild our light. Can I have it? There's probably a fast button here. Build lighting only. Yeah, sure, go for it. Ah, exciting stuff. So, as I understand it, the swarm mechanic is trying to get help from some kind of UE server farm, Unreal Engine server farm. I don't know whether that's actually happening or not, but it's super fast. Now, I did get a new machine, so maybe the new machine can do that kind of lighting calculation super fast on its own, or maybe I'm getting help from UE's server farm, but I'm not paying Unreal anything, so I really hope I'm not sucking up their server farm goodies without giving them anything back. I need to make this character not jump quite so high. We're also going to need to add physics support for in-jump motion, jump jets, you know. So it's going to be fun to tweak this and try and figure out what's going on. But the very first thing we got to do is turn that jump down. It's set to like a million height. Character movement, character rotation, fly speed, character movement, swimming, jump Z velocity. That's way too high. Oh, is there just like a air control point too? Cool. Wow, that is way lower than 1/4. Interesting. Is it because my air control is now too high? Yeah, I think that because I'm trying to walk while I'm in the air, the Z velocity is getting nerfed. That's interesting. Let's try that out. Let's find out. Let's bring this back down to 0.2 and see whether or not it is. I can't tell. Either way, clearly I thought that 2,000 was going to be too much and 1,000 is too little. Was it because I was running and it was like multiplying my velocity by my speed? Because, I mean, that's about the right kind of height. Yeah, now that I've got air control, it feels a little bit better. Yeah, but this seems fine for now. Obviously, that sort of thing will depend on which mech you've got, right? So the idea here is that there will be a trade-off. There's going to be like a core circle, a core column that you can't go within. But as long as you hit the waypoints, you don't have to stick to the road. Which means that when you get to situations like this where it goes around, you can just go off the road, and as long as you don't go too far in, you can just take this kind of shortcut. Now, the actual game is going to have much larger loops, but the basic idea is the same. So what I'm thinking is we'll need to put in a little bit of terrain editing and sort of just flesh this out just a touch. This isn't anywhere near like a final actual level that we're going to use, but I want it to be at least an example of the kind of thing we're likely to get. Let me just take a look here. Foliage. Mesh paint. Okay, so I presume that these are all things I'll use. So let's go and switch over to Sculpt. Yeah, so what we're going to want to do is put a little bit of a cliff in the way here. We don't want to cut over the spline at all, but something like this. And then to make it kind of fun, we'll go ahead and use some of these cool brushes that give us some fun effects. Now the only question I've got is, can I go down? Is it shift? Yeah, shift goes down. I think this is at 0. No, okay, good. Unity made the mistake of starting all of the land at 0, which means that you couldn't actually go below where it started. You had to manually set everything to be at a certain height and then move the mesh, and it was always just a pain in the ass. Glad to know that's not the case here. So let's put in some hydro erosion. The only thing is this hydro erosion creates these pockets, which I think might end up causing some problems with the mech footing. I'm not sure yet. Haven't built it yet. So we're gonna just see how this works. Can I shift to unerode? I don't know. I don't get the feeling like it's uneroding. We can add some noise, but I'm not sure. The noise doesn't appear to go in a specific direction, which makes it a little bit challenging. Here's some flattening. Let's create some flattened areas up here just so that we can get a good feel for it. Here we are. Yeah, perfect. All right, let's take a look. So let's let's continue to edit just by moving our dude out to the road so that we don't have to walk there and get confused all the time. Yeah, so just switch back over into world mode and then over you go. And I think that we might be a little bit below the road, so I'll just raise this up a notch. Woo! Now we're definitely... All right, so you can see how I've created a little ravine here. The road is poking out. That's the sort of thing we'll fix in the long run. So here you can see you can go over like that, but you can also just take this little shortcut. It's a very simplified version of what the game will actually entail, because I don't think there will be very many obvious shortcuts like that. But if this is your first time, it would make sense. Let's try some other stuff. Woo-ha! Let's play around some. So we'll go back over into landscape mode. So that's just shift 2. Okay. Let's do a little bit of work on tweaking some of the things that are just bad before we go to trying to do other things. So we'll just pop this up. Oh, too high. Maybe I'll use flatten. And over here, you can see how we've got a little bit of push through. So we'll just bring those down as well. But we're going to want to make that something that's not quite so... trying to figure out the best words for this here. You know what? We can go back into spline mode. Boom. There we are. So the thing we were trying to accomplish here is there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle still missing, including terrain that isn't just flat green moss. So we switch over to paint. And it does appear to be trying to paint a layer, but the problem is I think we don't have any layers. Yeah, so I think we have to define more layers. Not sure how to do that. Let's go ahead and try to use some noise brushes and stuff first. We'll come back to the layer editor. So, noise brushes. These are not... I meant to say debris brushes. What do you want to call it? Either way. Click and drag directly in the viewpoint to paint selected foliage. We don't have any foliage selected. It doesn't appear that we have any foliage set up in the default assets. No, I don't really see any foliage. I see some rocks, though. That was weird. All right, so let's try something besides foliage. Let's try mesh painting. Select a mesh. Switch tools to paint vertex colors. Okay, this is not what I expected. Vertex colors? Select a mesh. Isn't this a mesh? Is this not considered a mesh? It's like considered an object or something? Vertex adapter click tool. I think that I'm trying to do something here that I don't understand. This looks like it would be really, really useful as... My guess is that it's intended to let you merge objects with the ground. Like, do vertex color painting to control the splat texture so that the bottom of the rock is covered in moss or something. I don't believe that when it says to select a texture, I don't believe that it means to select one in the content browser. I think it means to select one in the game world, like here. So if I were to select a texture here, switch tools to paint vertex colors. I don't know what that means. Ah, paint. So here you can see we are vertex painting a white. Let's go ahead and make it red or purple or something. Yeah, so I don't believe the material we're using for this actually has... Yeah, I don't believe that the material we're using actually has any use for vertex colors. So we're not going to get any performance out of this. But we'll keep it in mind for when we are doing, trying to like merge rocks into the ground and stuff like that. At least that's my assumption. Either way, that's not what I need. I do need the foliage, but I don't have... So when I tried to add the foliage before, it said it was going to save over something. I don't know. So when you selected SM Rock, can we just add a B? SM Rock B. Oh, okay. So I have to pick a mesh. Fine. We'll just bow. Okay, so that didn't work. Using the checkbox on the foliage thumbnail. Okay, okay. You don't need to be quite that aggressive, I understand. So we're going to have to pull back on the brush. It's a hell of a lot. 0 might be too few. Okay, so this is like a really, really sensitive drag box. Okay, that's better. That's more like what I had in mind. 1 is probably a little too few. Try 5. Yeah, that's more like it. Now we're getting a lot of problems where we're not getting the same scale, so let's change it to free scale with these. Now, some of you might notice that this is extraordinarily similar to the tools I built to do the same thing in Unity. They're just automatic here in, they're already included in Unreal, which is not a terrible surprise to me because I already knew that they were basically standardized tools. It's just that Unity didn't have them. Now, the only problem I've got with this is I'm not at all sure that this is actually going to allow me to do stuff with them, depending on what they consider foliage to be. So you can see when I've selected the foliage, I've selected all of them at once rather than a single rock. And that is a concern of mine because I like to edit them after I create them. I think that I have the option to do that. I saw some options that seemed likely, but there are a lot of other concerns I've got. For example, what happens when I run into them? So let's go ahead and run into them and see what happens. Nothing. I thought that would happen. So my guess is that the foliage is not intended to be collidable. It's really intended for like grass, stuff like that. So we could use it for something like stones, but they'd have to be very small stones. And we'll have to use a mesh sprayer of some kind instead of the foliage painter in order to really do this. But let's just take a quick little look. Maybe there's some other options here. Foliage, instant static mesh, radius, so that's fine. Z offset, instant settings. So movable objects, slowest rendering. I don't believe that's going to help, but we'll give it a shot. Collision presets. There we are. I don't know what these mean. Alright, so now that I've turned on that, let's see whether or not it works. Ba-da-ba-ba-bum-bum. Ba-da-ba-bum-bum. Bum-bum-bum-bum. Bum-bum-bum-bum-bum. Oh, nothing. Nothing. Okay, so my assumption here is that it doesn't have a collision material or a collision, not a material, a collision shape. My assumption is that the collision preset does nothing because it doesn't have a collider. We'll have to work that out later. I don't need them to be movable. I just need them to be collision. Block all dynamic, block all. I don't believe it has a collider, so no matter what I change it to, it's not going to do anything because there's no collider. There's probably a couple of other ways to do this. These really aren't suited to be painted on en masse quite like this, because it's clearly intended for grass, and I'm not using it for that at the moment. So if I were to take these and clear it, boom. I could create some grass or something. We'll deal with that later. My guess is simply that I need to be doing something slightly different in order to be able to... Whoa. So brush editing. Brushes are normally used in like BSP leveled editors. I'm not sure. Are these considered brushes? No. I'll have to look that up. That is something I'm not familiar with yet. Here's some cinematics. Level sequence. Ooh. We'll just go ahead and rebuild. What is this? Control Shift. There we go. Oh, I clicked on something and now it says that whatever I've just selected is a brush. Isn't what I just selected like the light volume? Post-process volume. Why is the post-process volume a brush? That's interesting. I guess it makes sense. It's just not how I think of post-process volumes. Changing the setting only applies to new painted foliage. It doesn't back propagate. So I thought I tested that. Let's go ahead and test it one more time. So if we were to create a new foliage type here, and then we were to go and see whether or not we can get this to have the right values. Static mobility should be fine. Block all collision should be fine. Let's go ahead and see whether or not it actually has a collider. No. I think the problem here is simply that I don't know how to get these little boys to have colliders. I didn't see an option for adding a collider to them. It asked for a mesh, not for a collider. If I take a look at the mesh we're using, it's right here. Pop it up. Maybe I should add a collider right here in the mesh, do you think? Collision. So we don't currently have any collider, and I don't want to make it collide perfectly because that would be expensive. What I really want to do is... What the heck? We'll do it the expensive way for now, and we'll come back to it later. So now that I've added a collider... look at that. You were right. Path Tracer, you are 100% correct, at least. I actually don't know whether you were correct or not, but you were correct in that it could be done, and I did it. The problem is that now I have every single rock with a full mesh collider, and really all I need is for them to have like a spherical collider or a capsule collider. I don't really know how to make those, but let's investigate. So... here is the collisions, and I see there's like a primitive list here, but I don't know how to add the colliders. Collision. So if we add the simple collision, can we edit it? Add sphere. That's too big. How can I scale this down? I'm sure there is a better way to do this. I just don't happen to know it. So what we're going to do is... should we use 2 spheres, or should we use a box, or should we use a capsule? Let's go ahead and use a capsule. I think that would be easiest. Of course, now the capsule is... why isn't this automatically scaled correctly? If they have the mesh, they should be able to just calculate out the bounds. It looks like they tried to, but they came up with an answer that doesn't make any sense. That's weird. That should be fine. Alright, so now we've got a much more simplified collision. Let's take a look. Very good. So the idea here is that if you were going to do something like this, you wouldn't want to try and land on the rocks unless you were really confident in your balance, because these things are not, they're not going to be stable. I mean, they're stable, but they're not going to be large, flat places for you to land. So the other thing we've got here is that all of these rocks are oriented the same. Or are they? See, I scaled them all, and it's a very generic rock on purpose. So it's a little bit hard to tell. I feel like they're all pointed the same. And I would like that to not be the case. So can we make them have an arbitrary rotation? Height, random pitch, and random yaw. Okay. So here we have the aligned to normal, and we're going to go ahead and uncheck that. We'll give them a random yaw. Okay, so they spin around the vertical axis, and then we have a random pitch angle up to the specified angle in degrees. Alright, so that's definitely more chaotic. That's a better fit for our needs. Do I shift to delete them? I do. Alright, that's good, that's good. It's good, it's good, it's shaping up great. Thanks for stopping in, Path Tracer. I would have probably moved on too fast if you hadn't been here to tell me to do it again. Here you can see we've got a ground slope angle, which is telling the game not to add these if the ground is too sloped. But that's not necessarily what we want, so we're going to go ahead and raise that max. That way we can paint it on the side, see? And that's kind of on purpose. We're going to need to figure out how to paint something besides green dirt, I'm going to need to have a brush that's got like a rock terrain textures and stuff like that. I just don't know how to do that just yet. It'll be a little bit of effort before we get there. Still, let's go ahead and see how this feels. I mean, as a quick test, this feels great. Super basic. Yeah. This is definitely a good path forward. So, what else do we need? I mean, I really want to be able to paint multiple layers onto this landscape. But the problem is that when I set this up, I didn't add any layers, and I can't find the option to add a new one. So I need more material layers, and I don't. Landscape component override. Baked textures, lighting, navigation tags, activation, cooking. Let's look it up. Unreal Engine, add material layer, landscape. Landscape edit layers. To use landscape edit layers, click edit layers under the manage tab. I don't see an edit layers, do you? Am I high? See how this is 0 here? Assign a material to see. I did assign a material. This is a new landscape. But even with the new landscape, I see 0 layers even after editing a material. Enable edit layers. If I were to select all of these, material, I'm probably going to have to watch a video tutorial about this. It doesn't seem, I don't see the options they say I should see. That is a shame. I could create a new one, a new material, a new landscape with enable edit layer. But yeah, I assigned a material. Is this not a material? Yeah, that's a material. Fill world. Okay, that's too much. Unfill world. All right, let's go ahead and clear this. Can I reset it? I hit fill world and it made like a massive terrain chunk. I guess I can reduce it just by manually. Yeah, that's fine. Great. Okay, so now I've got two terrain brushes and two terrain elements, and we're overlapping here. Layers. Okay, so this is the original, I think. Yeah. So the original has layers, but the only layer is a height map. I don't see any layer editing here either. Oh, here. Edit layers. Okay, so if I change to the landscape, it doesn't exist. Okay, so the problem is I didn't enable it on the original landscape. And apparently I can't enable it afterwards. That's a shame. So I guess we'll delete it. Goodbye! Alright. Took my road away with it, but the road was very interesting, very easy, so we're not too worried about it. Here we've got our edit layers. We could add a new layer. I don't know what it means. Am I not doing this right? Am I misunderstanding? It's possible that layer isn't what the term I'm looking for. It's possible that layer is like a sculpt layer. So for example, if we were to create a like a bit of a lump here and then turn this layer off. Okay. So this isn't a texture layer. Let's see if we can get our old landscape back. Yeah. Just delete the new one. So that's not a texture layer. It's a size layer. It's a depth layer. So when I want to paint something here, is it both? It might be both. I'm going to have to look it up. Going to have to look into it and do some research. We won't worry about that for now. One of the other things worth considering is what sort of visual I want to go with for this game. I can just go with the default Unreal visuals. I do know quite a bit about making my own shaders. So, okay, so C zooms in. That's nice to know. Z zooms out. Okay. Something wrong with that. What's it doing? It's not... Is it changing the FOV? That's interesting. Okay, well, I'll have to remember that. Make myself sick with it. So I'm able to make my own shaders, and it doesn't really matter. Any node-based shader system is pretty trivial to use. So I could make, a node-based shader system if I wanted to make this look more unique. I don't know whether I do or not. I can tell you that I don't want it to look like this, just because this is not very cohesive. But these are just random things I threw together, so that's not a big surprise. What I want the game to look like should be based on what the mech looks like. And so it's worth sort of thinking about how I want the mech to look at this stage. And there's a couple of basic categories of mech. Now, of course, a mech is a fantasy thing, but there are still some very common versions. One version, of course, is the BattleTech style industrial mech. Those are basically just substitutes for tanks, and that doesn't really make any sense in a racing game. Not exactly, anyway. The industrial look of them doesn't really fit into a racing setting, because if you think about race cars, they are brightly colored, and they're there's a whole bunch of things plastered on the sides, advertisements and stuff, and they do have some industrial looking elements to them because oftentimes parts of their engines are exposed and stuff. But they don't have a armored parts and stuff like that. So let's So making an industrial mech that looks like a Mech Warrior style is probably not a good idea. There's probably not much need for that. Another common mech style is the what do I call it? Like fast mech. There are a whole bunch of games where you play as an extraordinarily fast mech, and the idea there is that the mech is basically a substitute for like a horse. And in those games, there is an emphasis on speed, but that's actually not what I want. I want my mechs to feel pretty clunky and slightly clumsy. So I don't want them to feel terribly fast. I don't want them to feel terribly nimble. Whenever you go off-road, I want it to feel like you are taking something off-road that isn't really terribly good at going off-road. And I mean, I could just make it about cars, I guess, but that's not the point. And I guess the third kind of mech would be the old school cartoon Transformer mech, like Voltron and stuff. I'm sort of trying to think of a visual that I want. And I guess what we should do is pull out the old art program. So let me give you Phoenix Wright for a second here. Wait, please. Let me pull up my art program and set everything up so we can do some quick little sketching. Boom. There we are. Let's go back over into the tab where I can see people talk. Not that I expect anybody to do any talking, because there's nothing more interesting than watching someone fumble with Unreal. Oop. Get out my art stuff. So obviously a big part of how you want your mech to look. I'm going to be doing component mechs, so you'll be able to trade out components. But a big part of it is going to be the color scheme. Not by which I don't actually mean the color scheme. I mean like the palette, the texture of the colors. Because you've got a lot of industrial mechs and they're generally basically gray, with like a couple of stark little emblazoned elements. But then you've got a lot of these really, really high color, high contrast mechs that look like children's toys. And I think that we're going to want to do that. I think we're going to want to have the high contrast mechs that look like children's toys. And so that means we've got to balance the bright saturated color elements with the mechanical elements, the parts that are not painted because they're the important parts that move. But we also have to determine the kind of stance we want, the kind of pieces we want. So let's go ahead and just sketch up some quick little ideas here. So if we were to come up with some mech legs, we could have something a bit like we want the legs to feel pretty honking. There's nothing wrong with Digitrot or backwards legs or anything like that. So we might as well try them out and see how they feel, right? So if we have like legs like this. It's a very stompy mech, right? Now, the torso is one of those areas where in a battle game you have this very, very large torso element, and it's heavily armored and it does all of that stuff. But I don't think that's what we want, because I don't believe that we want to feel like a battle mech. These are supposed to be fast mechs, right? So I'm thinking maybe the torso has to be a little bit different than a standard mech torso. And I'm sort of just sketching up a humanoid thing just to get the feel of it. But if we were to, I guess I don't want to delete the sketch, I'll just move it off to the side here. If we were to think about the torso, the big thing about a torso is that it contains the reactor for the mech and probably the cockpit. The mechs we're using aren't really big enough. If we take a look at the Unreal Engine here, the mech that we created here, poof, go over to it. If we take a look at how large it is compared to the car, so here's the blueprint for the Toyota, just bring it over here. I mean, unless we're going with a pretty big head, the head won't be large enough to contain a cockpit. So that means that the cockpit is going to be in the chest, and it's probably going to be right next to the reactor or above the reactor. And I'm saying reactor, it's, you know, a science fiction device that produces energy. It doesn't have to be a reactor. But if we come at this with kind of an open cockpit sort of feel, we can probably get something interesting out of it, right? So if we decide that our mech is going to have like an open style cockpit where we can see the actors, the pilots, sitting in there, gripping the sticks and making the mech move like this, right? Then we can go with a pretty specific style of mech, right? So there'll be glass in front of them. It's not like they're, well, maybe they'll be exposed to the elements. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. But the point here is that there's going to be something like this, right? And then we would have a reactor as well. And I think that would be located behind, like this. And then we would have some armor elements or something in front like this, right? And that'll give us kind of this kind of portly look. If we try and minimize the positions of everything. We could also put the person on top or behind. We could have like a giant mech torso like this, where we got the person sitting here, and then there's a reactor out here, and then we've got legs. But we want to have mechs that can move on their feet pretty easily, and that means that we've got to have mechs that are not super off-center. We don't want the mech to have something projecting really far forward or really far backwards, because it makes it difficult to control. It makes it feel difficult to control it. Obviously, it's a game, so I can make it as easy or hard as we want. But by creating a mech that's got a more or less barrel-shaped torso, we'll have a slightly easier time with it. That said, I don't want it to be completely barrel-shaped, so we'll have it come in. And then for the legs, we want it to feel like it is fast, but also mechanical and not like a magic mech. If we were to look up like what is it called, the big dog robot, just to take a look at how real world mechanical legs look. Yeah, so the legs of the robots that we're seeing coming out these days, Boston Dynamics and stuff, what they do is they create a stilt leg. How do I want to put it? Basically, there is a chamber where all of the elements that actuate the leg belong. And they're not spread out along the leg like you get in, say, a person. And because of that, what they have is basically like this really heavy thigh, like this, which is just connected using a couple of standardized rotor joints or something. And then they've got a joint that is controlled by the actuators inside that giant unit. And the joint itself is really, really basic. So it would come down into like something foot-like. Now, an advantage of this is that it would feel kind of organic because we're not plating the lower leg. Most mechs that you see in fiction and fantasy, they have really, really heavy lower legs, big feet, lots of mechanisms in the leg elements. If we were to separate ourselves from that, we could create a little bit of a unique feel to our mech units in a really easy and straightforward way. But I don't like how this feels with the body we've got, especially once we start to add in arms and stuff, right? Let's go ahead and see how it feels with an arm built into it here. So if we do this same basic idea with the arms, then we can have the arms be a similar sort of... it looks like a cartoon hand, doesn't it? We'll work it out. Yeah, I'm trying to think about... So the whole point of this is that there's no real complexity at the tips of the arms or the legs. It's all of the complexity is in this casing. So when we think about the hands, we would want to simplify them. So maybe we will... Because the only thing you'll be using your hands for in this game would be pushing other mechs around, or maybe grabbing onto the side of a cliff or something. So if we were to go with a real mechanical element like this, we could do a little bit of something a little bit cybery with the joints, make the joints not quite so sausagey. We could also add maybe pivot marks or something. Yeah, we can probably make that happen. That mech thick, the Relin says. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. See, the issue here is that in reality, the mechs are thick. The closest thing we've got to mechs, they are thick. They have wide hips, and then they have wide set hips because they're off to the side of the main body. And then they've also got big, thick thighs because all of the machinery is in the thighs. And then the actual legs themselves are just posts with rubber things on the end, which is more or less how I think we should go here. But I don't want the mech to feel really dumb. You know what I mean? So let's go ahead and do another refinement of this visual. I do like the idea of not having a head, having it so the pilot seat is the head. I just don't like how these legs are fitted on, so we're going to try and refine that a little bit. I don't think we need the super wide stance, so if we were to come up with the same basic visual, we could just have the seat here, and then the same kind of barrel refined body. And then we could just pull the hips down and in compared to where they were before, so they would be down like this instead. So here's the arm. And then another arm over here, just to give the top of the body the weight it needs before we move into the bottom of the body. And then when we bring in the hips, I want them to feel a little bit... See, they're too organic the way I hooked them up before. They look too much like a living thing's hips might look. So if we pull them out and connect them via struts and wires or something, we can try and get something a little bit more robotic. I want to pull them down more than I want to pull them out. Let's try that one more time here. So, just in terms of the flavor, we are going to end up with hippie mechs, and I think that's fine, because a hippie mech, you know, if you're moving fast, if the whole point is to run, then you're definitely going to want to emphasize the hips, because that's what gets beefy in things like Wildcats and so on. So that's kind of the sensation we want, but we just don't want the mechs to feel chunky in quite the same way. In this case, I've sort of given it a waist, which wasn't quite what I had in mind, but we can work on that. I kind of like the long limbs. The question is what I do with the waist of the mech. Because, I mean, from this angle, this looks like a butt, and it's not a butt. It's floating out from the mech at a considerable distance. And that would be obvious if you were seeing it from another angle. But I'm not sure whether or not it feels right. Because obviously this kind of mech doesn't have a butt. All of the actuation is done right up against the joint there, so there's no butt. If I were to give the mech a butt, that would be where the legs would be attached, rather than off to the side. I mean, I might as well sketch it and see whether or not that sort of fits. So if we were to think of a mech like that, we would have the same basic idea here for the body and the arms. So just bring it down. And then we would attach the legs kind of in a rear axle. What would happen if I reversed that leg? Would that make more sense? We'll try it both ways. So if I actually give it a butt, it starts to really look organic and feminine, which isn't quite what I need for this. I don't want it to feel too organic, you know? But if I were to revert the legs or invert the legs, I don't think that works. I think that the tilt I want, the forward tilt, doesn't work with pigeon foot legs. The Relin says I shouldn't be scared. I should give the mech a butt and make that the point of the game. Which, I mean, I would consider that, except I have a problem with animating it. And I don't mean a moral problem. I mean, I'm not quite sure how the plates would work. I kind of am thinking that the butt mech might be really funny, though, because you're looking at the mech from behind, like, for 80% of the game, right? And it would be really, really hilarious to have the point of the game be people bidding on whose stickers get to get stuck on your butt. You know, like advertising. Everyone's got advertising on those race cars, right? But if a mech has a butt, then the butt is where all of those stickers are going to go. So even though this mech looks like it has a butt, from behind it, it doesn't actually have one. It would look kind of like this from behind, where it's got just a mounting bracket sort of setup like this, and then you've got the legs out here. And there's really no space there for anybody to stick any stickers. So my thought was you'd stick them on the thigh. Like, oh, look, Granny Smith apples, or whoever is advertising for you, and put them on the thigh. If we created a butt, I don't know how that would work in terms of the animations involved. So if I were to think about it, so let's just draw it from the side for a minute here. Let's bring those down. And if we draw it from the side, then we've got a cockpit that's sort of like this. I guess it's slanted back a little bit. And it's got a roll cage, and then it's got this sort of shoulder bracket mounting right here, and there's the shoulder. And then it comes down like this into this kind of shape here, and then we have a very humanoid leg and butt, because why not, right? And then it goes down into the weird little inhuman element, which is the actuated part of the leg that doesn't have any actual pieces that are being moved internally. So if we wanted to think about that, we would want a couple of things. The first is we would want to add in the rotating elements at the waist. The Relin says I should put in I should just make them look like the leg extensions that people run with. So the problem with those leg extensions is they're not intended for off-roading. But it's worth looking up. Prosthetic runner. Yeah, so basically those leg extensions, and the most common ones are foot replacements, foot and ankle replacements. The knee is still a human knee. They have a lot of spring to them, with the idea being that it's the spring motion that pushes the runner. You lose almost nothing because the spring of the leg just brings you right back. It's worth exploring as a concept. Most of the differences would be down in the foot area if we were going to do that. So if we were going to try that out, it would be, instead of this, it would be more like this, because they're basically shaped like an arc, and they've got some kind of pad on their feet. But I don't know whether or not that's going to be a suitable visual for what we're trying to accomplish here. I don't think I want them to look that human. And it sounds strange, when you say something like, "Oh yeah, well, these leg replacements that don't look at all, they're not ordinary human leg replacements." Thank you, notifications. That was super helpful. So saying that makes it look more human is a little bit strange. But since we've replaced the hips with human hips, creating anything that creates a sort of visual arc, a familiar arc, is going to end up feeling too familiar, which is why I want to invert it like this. I think that it feels a little bit less human if we sort of make it more of an animal shape, which is really more in line with what we're getting out of this. I think we have to go out of our way to make it inhuman. And we have a lot of excuses because the runner prosthetics are on road. I don't think they would be used in an off-road environment, because when you step onto something soft like dirt or grass or sand, you're going to want to have a little bit more breadth. They're very thin and tight, and that's actually a big selling point. I think their spring might screw you up if you have some give. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm sort of making excuses. I don't have to make excuses because this is a fantasy world. I can do whatever I want. But if we wanted to sort of have that feeling, we would just have the shape be like this. I just think that might not... I don't know. I like having the really long straight piece with the rest of the body being kind of shapy and like curvy. Anyhow, if we're talking about butts, then we're going to need to think about the rest of the mech in terms of reducing the amount of human ness. That feels a little too human once it's got a butt, right? So if we were to sort of work that out, we would come in with something like this torso connective piece would have to be a rotating disc of some kind. And I think maybe what we would do is go for, I don't know, I'm trying to think about what it would look like. Maybe we would do a double, like inverted V sort of setup. Because I don't want to have a narrow waist. I don't want it to be an hourglass shape exactly. It's going to have to be one because the hips are so much larger than the rest of the body. Another possibility is that instead of having an entirely intact leg unit like this, we would split the leg into pieces, something like this, and then we would have some big mechanical elements showing here. Which I think would probably be pretty cool if we could pull that off. But I don't know how that works in terms of shape language. It feels... maybe we're going about this wrong in the first place. Maybe we want the shape to be contained, right? We want the shape of the leg to be contained. But rather than hiding it behind a simple shape, maybe that should be a complex visual engine. Something which has a lot of density, visual density to it, so that it is loud in terms of visual, being visually loud. And then, no, the butt. I don't think I can put the butt in. I just can't seem to figure out a way to make it have a butt that works. It's too human. It just becomes too human when you add a butt. Maybe we'll have the option to add a butt just on top of this kind of bracketing. I don't know. I like this shape. This one here. This is probably what I'm going to go with. All right. Well, I could model that, but my voice is going. And since I'm out of voice, I'm out of time. I'm going to go have a nice drink, and I'll see you in a couple of days. I'll probably do some of this off screen, but we'll see. Have a good one. Where's that pause button?